In our previous episode of Market Journal, we talked about using disease histories to make seed corn selections for 2018. This week, Nebraska Extension entomologist Julie Peterson will explain how to assess which Bt traits could be most effective in your field. Bt corn is genetically engineered to produce a toxic protein for control of corn rootworms, earworms, or European corn borers throughout the growing season. In her recent Crop Watch article, Julie described how each of the commercially available Bt proteins affect specific insect species. We started our conversation by asking how to know which of those species might be in a farmer's field.
So we're talking about choosing Bt traits. And when we're thinking about Bt traits, the first pests that comes to mind are the corn rootworms. So we have western corn rootworm and northern corn rootworm. Primarily we're talking about the eastern part of the state for northern corn rootworm. One really important thing for these pests is that they are only in continuous corn, so they can only survive on a corn host or a few weedy species. So if you're rotating your crop, if you're going into first year corn and you have done a good job of controlling volunteer corn from the previous year, you really should not be concerned about the rootworms, and you will not need a rootworm trait. We do have a very small exception, and that is for our growers who are on the far eastern side of the state if they have northern corn rootworm that has extended diapause. This is where the eggs can actually last an additional winter in the soil and can last through to the next year. But that's a pretty limited area in the eastern part of the state. You can speak with your local extension personnel if you have a question about whether you're in that area or not.
Which proteins are effective against which insects?
Yes, so for our below ground pests, for our rootworms, we have several different types. The Cry3BB1 protein was the first one that came out. That has been planted quite a bit, however, so we do have some resistance concerns. The Cry3BB1 would be in the same sort of resistance category as the Cry3A and the Cry1. And then we have our Cry3435. That's one of the newer below ground proteins that we have thus far seen just a very limited amount of concerns with that one for the rootworm beetles. Of course, we have the other whole suite of proteins that are for our above ground pests as well. So these are our caterpillar pests, things like European corn borer, western bean cutworm, corn earworm, fall armyworm, those sorts of insects.
You mentioned resistance. How quickly can resistance develop?
Really quite quickly. So our first rootworm proteins came out in 2003. And it was as early as, I believe, the early around 2010 when we started to see some concerns. So anytime we use pretty much any type of product, whether it's a Bt protein or an insecticide spray, if we're using that same product year after year and we're not rotating, we're not doing other resistance management practices, we are going to see resistance happen.
Is non-Bt corn a viable option?
It certainly is. That's actually something that more of our growers are thinking about in terms of sort of tightening the belt. There may be also popcorn producers, white corn producers that might not be an option for them. There absolutely are ways to produce non-Bt corn, but it's really going to include a lot more of the Ipm practices that are going to be really critical. So a lot of scouting. We do have some good resources in terms of scouting your fields, using economic thresholds, determining when is the best time to treat for things like European corn borer in non-Bt fields.
How would you prefer growers use these choices of proteins in their overall Ipm strategies?
Well, definitely we like them to think about using Bt traits as just one component of an integrated pest management approach. So crop rotation, scouting, judicious use of at-plant or foliar applications of insecticides, considering biological controls as well. So they're really one very important piece of our management, and we'd like to try to use them in a way that we can keep them as an effective part of our management for as long as possible.